This is a presentation on the policy proposal to address hate crimes against transgender Americans, and it is written by Travis Enders. This slide will go over what it means to be transgender and the background behind what trans people had to go through for the past many years. Transgender can be defined as relating to or being a person whose gender identity differs from the sex the person had or was identified as having at birth. This was from the Webster Dictionary, and it was first introduced in 1974. Transgender people face different types of hate crimes and violence towards them. There have been several different severities of hate crimes, such as assault or even murder, towards this minority group based on their gender identity or sexual orientation. For many years, transgender people have been in the minority groups, and they have faced a lot in their history. For example, the history is so complex and has been recently studied that there were a couple people in the Civil War that broke the gender norms or tried to bend them. For example, on this slide, there is Jack Williams, aka Francis Callan Clayton. He bent the gender norms to be able to fight in the war. He dressed up as a man and lived that way for several months in the Civil War. This represents that many transgender people were around in this time period and tried to come out and show themselves as their true beings. This slide will go over the history of transgender events and the main ones that have helped influence the new laws and protections around this minority group. One of the main events that influenced the change for transgender individuals was the Stonewall Riots in 1969, one of the main events in LGBT history. Thousands of people protested in the streets in response to a police raid on Greenwich Village gay bar, have long been identified as the most important event in U.S. lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer LGBT history. The reason why the police raided the bar is unclear, and many people have different beliefs on why they raided the bar. One of the main suggestions or ideas that people have is that there was no official or unofficial investigation of why the police did it, but there was a belief that the police had corruption within the force, and they were going towards targeting people that were attending by pulling people who participated in male prostitution and blackmailing rings that targeted men who had sex with men in the bar. People continued to riot, to protest, and the police and inform people that LGBT people are allowed to do what they want and live their lives. 1 year later, the first anniversary of Stonewall Riots started the first gay pride parade, which began the first one in the United States, and it continued every year since. This started the beginning of the renaissance against police raids and police brutality towards transgender people. In the past few years, there have been a memorial every year to represent all of those who have been killed due to violence towards transgender people. This event is called the Trans Day of Remembrance, where people will gather and remember those who have died due to hate crimes committed against them, just for being transgender and who they are. There are countless of transgender people who are not accounted for because their hate crimes were not recorded or even found. For example, a person named Kerry Johnson advocates against hate crimes that have been taken towards transgender people. She talked to the news about how hate crimes are still in everyone's life today and still affecting individuals' lives and getting in their way of functioning. A main part of the article states that there's still a long way to go to tackle the significant discrimination and stigma they face. There needs to be more movements for tackling hate crimes and hate activities towards transgender people. This slide will go over some examples of hate crimes committed against transgender people. The Human Rights Campaign announced that 2020 was the most violent year on record for murders towards transgender people. In 2020, there were 48 murders of transgender and non-conforming people in the transgender community. This has increased by 4 in 2021. Coming to the end of 2021, this marks the new year of the most violent murders towards transgender people on record. A couple examples of this is that there were two siblings, one 16-year-old and one 22-year-old, one a trans boy, one a non-binary person. Both of them were killed on February 22nd in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. Another one from the Trans Day Remembrance list is Tyra Banks, a 24-year-old Black transgender woman, was killed in Chicago, Illinois on April 21st, 2020. According to a news report, Tara was sitting alone in her Ford Fusion when the shooter approached the vehicle and shot Tara multiple times. Tara was pronounced dead at the scene. From these murders, there has been a link that social media has opened the ability to commit hate crimes across a huge platform. By being able to use social media has opened doors for more hate crimes towards transgender individuals and imply more bullying across the platform as well, which targets transgender people due to Facebook postings or people following them and knowing that they're transgender and knowing where they live. So they're targeted more by sharing their information just on social media, and everyone can have access to it. This slide will go over current laws protecting transgender individuals and the history of the hate crimes getting put in place to then protect these minority groups. Through the law around the protections for transgender individuals is not concrete and has some gray areas. For example, some articles talk about how the federal policies and local policies protecting the sex of transgender individuals is seen as being vague, contradicting, and inaccurate. In 1968, the first federal protection statute was passed, but it did not include transgender protections against discrimination towards housing, seeing doctors, or having a job, or getting fired from a job. It was not until 2009 when Congress passed a bill that President Obama signed into action. This act was called the Matthew Shepard and James Bride Jr. Hate Crimes Protection Act, expanding the federal definition of hate crimes and enhancing the legal toolkit available to prosecutors and increasing the ability of federal law enforcement to support our state and local partners. This law then removed existing jurisdictional obstacles to prosecutions of certain race and religion-motivated violence, and added new federal protections against crimes on gender, disability, gender identity, or sexual orientation. This act helped transgender people feel more safe going to the doctor, knowing that they won't be excluded from getting housing or get fired for being transgender when they apply for a job. The protections for transgender individuals vary state by state and do not have concrete federal laws until 2009 when Obama signed that act into law. The laws protecting transgender people vary by states due to the type of people who live in the states and their beliefs that influence their state laws. It also influences if they are Democratic or Republican. A good example of a state that's really active in helping transgender people is Massachusetts. They have protections for transgender individuals regarding job discrimination, sexual reassignment surgeries, name change, and change of sex marker on documents. Mississippi is one of the least protected states for transgender people. This is because they have no laws or policies in place to protect transgender people from job discrimination, housing discrimination, credit, or learning discrimination, and people can discriminate against them marrying one another, and this does not happen in Massachusetts. This is the last slide, and we'll go over some solutions to transgender hate crimes. The first one on this list is to act, like pick up the phone, talk to others, to create a group to go out and protest, or sign a petition for a movement of protections for transgender people, and be creative in creating signs or anything like that. This leads into join forces. You can reach out to allies or, like, for example, churches, schools, clubs, or even groups around the area for everyone to come together and stand against the hate that is happening against this group of people, especially since many of transgender people who are experiencing hate crimes are being murdered. The next one is support the victims. Stand together in solidarity. They're especially vulnerable when they do face these hate crimes, so stand with them against the hate so they're not alone. Report every incident that happens. You want to make sure that you fight against any kind of hate, even if it's just hate mail or any federal offense like that. Speak to the press. Make sure that the news knows everything that's going on and knows that there's a story that is very important and that it gets passed along to as many people as it can. The fourth one is to speak up. Do not isolate and stick with yourself. It is not a debate. Hate members in conflict-driven forums. You need to stand up and speak up and join forces like the one before this. The next one is to educate yourself. Educate yourself on what transgender means and all the information of, like, what's going on and the murders that are happening. Be aware that Transgender Day of Remembrance happens in November. Stand for all of the victims who have died from hate crimes committed against them. And the sixth one is to create an alternative. Do not attend a hate rally. Attend a positive rally or just stand on the sides and have posters. The seventh one is to pressure leaders. Make sure that senators know, that the president knows our thoughts, and pass it along to police that we want protections, and just pass it along to anyone in higher authority to try to make a difference. The eighth one is to stay engaged, promote acceptance, and address bias before another hate crime can occur. So stay consistent and be participating in networking against this crime that's happening. The ninth one is teach acceptance. Bias is learned early, often at home. Schools can offer lessons of tolerance and acceptance. Learning and educating people young on the issues will benefit people in the long run. And then they can use it beyond the classroom. The last one, dig deeper. Look inside yourself for bias and stereotypes. Look inside yourself and see if you have feelings towards this, and try to educate yourself and try to change the way that you interpret society and people of minority groups and work together. So overall, standing up and working together will help slow down hate crimes. We know that we cannot fully take them away, but slowing them down and trying to put a stop to them will be the best option. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I hope that you take away of how to help transgender minority group victims of hate crimes.